July 1944. The beaches of Normandy are still soaked in blood. Nazi Germany is retreating but not yet broken. The Pacific War rages on with no end in sight. Tens of thousands of men are dying every week across 3 continents. And yet, in a grand mountain hotel in the tiny town of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, 730 delegates from 44 nations have gathered. Not to plan a battle, not to negotiate a ceasefire, but to do something far more ambitious. They are here to redesign the entire financial system of the world. No armies, no warships, no bombs, just economists, diplomats and bankers sitting in hotel rooms, arguing over currency exchange rates and the price of gold. What they decide over the next 3 weeks will shape every economy on Earth for the next 80 years. It will determine which countries grow rich and which stay poor. It will transform a single nation's currency into the financial oxygen that the entire world breathes, and it will quietly hand the United States a form of economic power more durable and more profitable than any military conquest in history. This is the story of Bretton Woods, the meeting most people have never heard of, the meeting that made America the richest country on Earth. To understand why Bretton Woods happened, you have to understand just how completely the old financial world had shattered. Before the First World War, the global economy ran on the gold standard. Every major currency was pegged to a fixed amount of gold. A British pound, an American dollar, a French franc, each one represented a specific guaranteed quantity of gold that any holder could theoretically redeem. This created stability. Exchange rates barely moved. International trade flowed relatively freely. It was an elegant, if rigid, system. Then came 1914. 4 years of industrial-scale slaughter cost governments sums of money so vast that no gold standard could contain them. Country after country abandoned the gold peg, printed money to pay for the war, and watched inflation tear through their economies. The brief attempt to restore the gold standard in the 1920s created more problems than it solved, locking countries into exchange rates they could not sustain. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the old order collapsed completely. Governments began doing what desperate governments always do. They devalued their currencies to make their exports cheaper, trying to steal trade from their neighbors. Their neighbors responded with their own devaluations. Then came tariffs, then trade barriers, then the complete freezing of international commerce. Economists call it competitive devaluation. At the time, people called it what it was: economic warfare, every country trying to export its poverty to everyone else. The result was catastrophic. Global trade collapsed by 65% between 1929 and 1932. Unemployment soared across every industrialized nation. Economic desperation fueled political extremism, and political extremism led, with terrible logic, to the Second World War. By 1944, the lesson was clear to anyone willing to learn it. Economic chaos breeds political chaos. Political chaos breeds war. If the world wanted lasting peace after this war, it would need a stable, functioning, cooperative international economy. Someone had to build it, and someone had a plan. The 2 most important men at Bretton Woods had never agreed on anything easily, and the future of the global economy would be shaped by which of them won. On one side sat Harry Dexter White, a blunt, aggressive American economist from the US Treasury Department. White was not famous. He was not charming. He was brilliant, combative, and utterly clear about one thing. Whatever new financial system emerged from this conference, the United States would be at its center. On the other side sat John Maynard Keynes, arguably the most famous economist alive, representing Britain. Keynes was everything White was not. Elegant, witty, a member of the Bloomsbury set, a man accustomed to being the most intelligent person in any room and not especially shy about it. He arrived at Bretton Woods seriously ill. His heart was failing, but still formidably sharp, still fighting for a vision of the post-war world that treated all nations as genuine equals. The two men had spent years before the conference exchanging drafts, proposals, and sharp correspondence. Their disagreement was fundamental. Keynes proposed a genuinely new international currency. He called it the bancor, that would be used only for trade between nations. No single country would control it. A new international bank would manage the system. Countries running trade surpluses would be penalized, just like countries running deficits, keeping the global economy in balance. It was idealistic, sophisticated, and designed to prevent any one nation from dominating the rest. White's plan was simpler and far more advantageous to his country. Keep the dollar. Peg every other currency to the dollar. Peg the dollar to gold at a fixed price of $35 per ounce. The United States, which by 1944 held approximately 2/3 of all the world's monetary gold reserves, would sit at the center of the entire global financial system. It was not a negotiation between equals. The United States was the only major economy that had grown stronger during the war. Britain was exhausted and bankrupt, dependent on American loans just to keep fighting. Keynes was negotiating from a position of almost total weakness, and he knew it. He fought brilliantly and lost comprehensively. The Bretton Woods system that emerged was essentially Harry White's plan. The agreement reached on the 22nd of July, 1944 was breathtaking in its ambition. Every participating nation would fix its currency to the US dollar at a stable exchange rate. The dollar itself would be fixed to gold at $35 per ounce, and the United States guaranteed that any foreign government could exchange its dollars for gold at that price on demand. The dollar became, in effect, the world's currency, not by conquest, not by force, by agreement signed willingly by 44 nations who needed American money and American markets to rebuild their shattered economies. Two new institutions were created to manage the system. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, would provide emergency loans to countries struggling to maintain their exchange rates, preventing the competitive devaluations that had destroyed the 1930s. The World Bank would provide longer-term financing for reconstruction and development. Both institutions were headquartered in Washington. Both were structured so that the United States held effective veto power over their decisions. The Marshall Plan that followed, $13 billion in American aid to rebuild Western Europe, was the engine that made Bretton Woods work. Devastated European economies needed dollars to buy American goods. America supplied those dollars through aid and loans, seeding the global economy with its own currency and simultaneously creating markets for its own exports. The system worked with remarkable success. The 1950s and 1960s saw the longest sustained period of economic growth in human history. Western Europe rebuilt itself with stunning speed. Japan transformed from a ruined, occupied nation into an industrial powerhouse. Global trade expanded year after year. The dollar flowed everywhere, financing growth on every continent. And the United States collected a prize that most of the world barely noticed it was paying. There is a concept in economics called seigniorage, the profit a government makes simply from issuing currency. When a government prints a dollar bill, it costs a few cents to produce. But that dollar bill buys a dollar's worth of goods. The difference is pure profit. The right to issue the world's reserve currency meant that the United States collected seigniorage not just from its own citizens, but from every nation on earth that held dollars. French President Charles de Gaulle, who resented American economic dominance with characteristic passion, called it the exorbitant privilege. The United States, he argued, could run trade deficits indefinitely, buying foreign goods and assets with money it had simply printed, while every other nation had to earn its way in the world. America could fund foreign wars, overseas bases, and a globe-spanning military presence simply by printing the currency that everyone else was obligated to accept. De Gaulle was right, and he was furious about it. By the late 1960s, the tensions in the system were becoming impossible to ignore. The Vietnam War was costing vast sums. President Lyndon Johnson refused to raise taxes to pay for it, funding the war by printing money instead. Inflation rose. The dollar, technically still pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, began to look increasingly overvalued. Foreign governments, led by France, began converting their dollar reserves into gold at an accelerating rate, draining Fort Knox in a slow, steady hemorrhage. The system was breaking down, and on the 15th of August 1971, President Richard Nixon ended it. In a televised address, Nixon announced that the United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold. The $35 peg was gone. The Bretton Woods system, in its original form, was over. Nixon's decision could have destroyed the dollar's reserve status. Without gold backing, why would the world continue to hold and trade in American currency? The answer came from an unlikely place: oil. Through quiet agreements with Saudi Arabia and the other OPEC nations in the early 1970s, the United States secured an arrangement that would preserve dollar dominance in a new form. Oil, the single most essential commodity in the global economy, would be priced and traded exclusively in US dollars. Any country that wanted to buy oil had to first acquire dollars. The petrodollar system replaced the gold-backed Bretton Woods system, and the dollar's global dominance continued uninterrupted. The IMF and World Bank, meanwhile, continued operating, still headquartered in Washington, still under heavy American influence, still shaping the economic policies of nations across the developing world through the conditions attached to their loans. The institutional architecture of Bretton Woods had outlasted the monetary system it was built to manage. 730 delegates, 3 weeks in a mountain hotel, 3 pages of dense economic text. The Bretton Woods Conference was not secret in the way of spy thrillers or conspiracy theories. Its proceedings were public, its agreements openly signed. But its true significance, the quiet revolution it represented, the staggering transfer of economic power it encoded, passed almost unnoticed by a world consumed by war. The men in that hotel room did not just redesign a financial system. They decided which nation would lead the post-war world. They decided whose currency would become the air that global commerce breathed. They decided in ways that are still playing out today who would be rich and who would struggle. America did not become the world's dominant economic power by accident. It was agreed upon in a hotel in New Hampshire in July 1944, while the guns were still firing. That is the extraordinary, quietly world-changing story of Bretton Woods.